Welcome to another episode of A Come Together. Oh, looks like we're recording. Hey, everyone. I guess welcome back. I guess we started recording. I pushed a button, and then Riverside, which admittedly used to have way more problems than it does now, seems to be working just fine these days. So I'm very happy about that for the most part. Thank you very much, Riverside, for really stepping up. And I'm sure you did not listen to a second of my criticisms, but it's good to know that it got acknowledged and that I probably was not the only person complaining about what I was complaining about. Just for clarity, just to summarize, just in case you don't know, Riverside.fm is the app I use to record my podcasts on. It's a wonderful app. There was a couple of glitches as Apple software was updating. There were a couple of glitches that would cause a crash or interruptions in the recording, which was a little difficult, a little frustrating. But it really seems like they were professional about it and they got their act together, and they really cleaned things up. So I appreciate it. I don't know if you care, but I appreciate it. So this is another solo episode today. Obviously, it's so silly because I literally have 5, 6, 7 people that are all, maybe even more, maybe 8 or 9 people that are all lined up and ready to roll. Aside from the people that I've been reaching out to on a daily basis, I spend time every day reaching out and researching people to talk to, and I have a ton of people that are all interested, that are all committed, that just need to find a couple of minutes in their time. And we're getting to a relatively crazy point in my life where we're coming up on Passover, which is a big Jewish holiday. I have no idea what the schedule is going to be for then. My family is coming down from New York to be with us. My wife is due and expecting in the next couple of weeks. And things are going to be hectic, but they're going to be great. They're going to be wonderful. I'm really, really excited about it. We have a lot of really wonderful things, and in keeping with the theme of having wonderful things going on, there's a whole lot that I want to talk about today, I hope. First of all, I'm very happy and I'm very proud of myself, and I highly recommend this. But I deleted Twitter off, or X off of my phone, Instagram as well, even though it wasn't nearly as compelling or addicting to me. And I deleted it, I think Saturday night, because I was hanging out with my wife and some friends on Saturday night. And I was sitting there while I was with my friends, and I was just scrolling on Twitter, scrolling on X, and just being completely absent. And then when I got home, I didn't want to do the same thing with my wife. So I went ahead and deleted the app. I said, okay, let me just delete it for the rest of the weekend. And then I kept it. I didn't re-download it yesterday. And I've only been going on it from my computer. And the way that you spend your time or your screen time on your computer is totally different than I think the way that you spend your screen time on your phone. And it's much easier to kind of pull yourself from your computer. With the computer, you have to be sitting, you have to be docked at a particular place, and there's something a lot less portable and a lot less just take it with you when it's on your computer. And I actually think that's really beneficial. I think that, there's been a whole conversation in the last 5 years or so since people started working remote during COVID. I started working remotely right before that, like a year beforehand, maybe even 6 months beforehand. So I just got right ahead of the trend. But one of the complaints that I've noticed that people have is that there's no work-life balance, and that it's really difficult to, even though it's much more flexible and much more convenient to be able to work from home and not have to go into an office and a commute. If you wanted to live somewhere else or spend some time somewhere else, it's easier to do that today than ever in history, and it's a massive, massive, massive blessing. I think it's really, really incredible, and it really gives people an opportunity to have some kind of freedom. And if used well, that freedom could be one of the most liberating experiences of our lives. One of the reasons why I say this, and the way I kind of get from point A to point B, from working remote equals happiness, I think, is that I've noticed, at least, and I've heard this backed up by a bunch of people a lot smarter and more professional than I am, but I think that the feeling of depression, or kind of in a feeling like you're in a rut, or dissatisfaction with your life in general, I think typically comes from the place of feeling like you have no license or choice over your life, over the decisions that you make, over the decisions that are being made pertaining to you directly, and that's kind of why it's a story as old as time that kids that grow up on their parents' roof want to break away. And why would they want to break away? Because when you're under your parents' roof, you're subject to the rules. When you're subject to the rules, you don't have the same freedom or flexibility to kind of really truly be yourself, and going out and doing, and that's just where you live, right? Now imagine the way that you spend 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day, and the way that you spend it and where you spend it and who you spend it for is totally not up to you. I mean, and of course everyone's like, okay, that's a job. And yeah, it is a job, but but these days, I mean, what the solution for a lot of people was, especially when you had to go into work, was to kind of find some kind of hobby, some kind of thing that you do with the other 30-40% of your waking time when you're not working, right? So, okay, so, at the end of the day, I have, I have 3 hours in my day where I'm free to do whatever I want, and I only have license for 3 hours. But if I make the most of those 3 hours or 4 hours, then my whole day really feels like good. If I really am intentional about the way I use my time, if I'm really intentional, hey, it's really important for me that I exercise. It's really important for me that I have a hobby that I feel like I'm getting better at, or some kind of form of self-expression, some kind of form of consuming or learning or growing or developing in a way that I have not until now. And I want to feel like it was my own choice in my own hands, how I choose, however much effort I choose to expend into whatever it is that I'm doing. There's almost a direct consequence of just me putting in the work, the time, the effort into making it happen. And and I think that a lot of people, especially people that typically grew up around big cities, where most of the jobs were, right? Where the real estate, and I've talked about this plenty of times, but real estate used to be so valuable because of certain factors that don't really exist right now, right? Foot traffic made a huge difference. How close you were to someone for delivery purposes made a huge difference. But then, we kind of got Amazon, and we got Walmart Plus, and we got eBay, and we got drop shipping, and we got and we have a whole new world and environment and TaskRabbit, where you don't even have to do these things yourself, and anyone that's local anywhere can kind of just sign anyone up for that. And with this new availability of being able to work from home, that also means that you have the ability to kind of choose the surroundings that you're going to be in, even if your time and the way that you spend your time isn't going to be directly for you. You at least have this license to say, hey, I never had a chance to move more than 20, 30 miles outside of Manhattan. Let me go ahead and see what it's like living in North Carolina for 6 months. Let me see what it's like to go ahead and spend the winter down in Florida, or the summer in the Pacific Northwest. So I think that there's really a lot of potential for a lot more satisfaction and happiness in people's lives. I just hope that people go ahead and really take advantage of it. I've talked about this also quite a bit. I'm not going to really harp on it, but I really strongly believe that I think that comfort tends to get in the way of meaningful satisfaction and emotional well-being. That things that are comfortable are just pretty much status quo and require less effort. But that doesn't. But I think that happiness, self-satisfaction, and the other good things that we all live for and we all strive for, those are those are a direct consequence of putting in effort and hard work. And so if you're going to be making decisions on based on what's comfortable, then you're almost certainly never going to get that feeling of true satisfaction and true contentness, even if things are good, right? Because you don't have the feeling that you created that good for yourself. You don't have that feeling that, and maybe it's just me. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people about this, and they seem to agree. I also admit that a lot of these concepts are a lot easier to talk about than they are to actually live, and it makes a big difference. You know, it makes a huge difference to actually say, I want to put in the effort to do something hard and feel good about it, and then actually getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to do jujitsu class, or to, put in a couple of hours of work at night into your physical health or a project you're working on, or becoming a better artist, a musician, or a writer, or whatever it is. It's much easier to talk about how, yeah, these are goals, these are ways, these are ways that you build, bro. And I mean, to actually roll up your sleeves, get dirty, and actually make it happen is something totally separate. And the only reason why I even got into this whole monologue to begin with, uh, by the way, great line, non sequitur, but I just watched The Incredibles with my class, and and in a response, it was so great because in Hollywood, I hate when villains or any characters just get these long, ridiculous monologues that feel incredibly out of place, super unrealistic, and extremely Hollywood-fied. Um, and I just showed my high school class, the 10th grade class, the movie The Incredibles, which they hadn't revisited in many, many years since they were kids. And the villain, and the villain was monologuing. It was Syndrome was explaining why he was doing what he was doing to Mr. Incredible. And while he was kind of talking and talking and talking, Mr. Incredible kind of snuck off and tried to escape. And his response was, "You sly dog, you got me monologuing." And I thought that was hysterical, because that's like, oh, we can't even help ourselves. We have to throw in long, stupid, excessive, rich monologues that no one really would ever say in real conversation in real life. But that's entertainment. But I'm happy. I love the self-awareness that came from typical old school Pixar. So the reason why I brought up that whole monologue was because I think that the relationship of having X on your computer versus having X on your phone, and using X exclusively on your computer as opposed to your phone, is that it kind of frees you. It almost frees you from that quote unquote work-life balance, where one of the problems that people have is that a lot of people work, myself included, is that we work from our phones. And thank God I'm an observant Jew, and I keep Shabbat, and I put my phone away, and I don't use electronics from sundown Friday evening to sunset Saturday night. And that time without my phone, and that time without checking everything in news and work and thinking about everything, and just being off and recuperating, is one of the best things ever. It's like a break from working from home. And when you work from home, there's no excuse to not respond to an email. There's no excuse to not respond to a text. There's no excuse to not pick up the phone. Except there is, and that excuse is that there has to be some kind of boundaries, some kind of line between what I'm getting paid for in my contract as what my responsibility is to a company, and what my responsibility is to myself and my family and my free time, and what's my responsibility to my community, what's my responsibility to my house, what's my responsibility to the world around me that really needs my care, right? Because the care that I the care that I have I have X amount of responsibilities on a daily basis. One of those responsibilities is to make money, but other responsibilities include maintenance, include invest in relationships, include time for myself, for prayer, for thoughts, for writing, for creative endeavors, for podcasts. Part of the time is for raising my son. Part of the time is for speaking to my family, and all of these are responsibilities that we should hopefully take very seriously, because because they're all components to a balanced life. And a life that's not balanced is unfortunately um, not only very difficult, but creates unhappy and unpleasant people, and people that are not very good for hanging around with. And so by me being able to kind of create this buffer where there is time for X, and it is not always. There's a time for checking the news, and it's not every 30 seconds, and it's not every 3 minutes, and it's not while I'm talking to my friends hanging out in the backyard. It's not while I'm watching a movie with my wife. There's a time and place for it, and there's a time and place for work, and there's a time and so by kind of creating that, establishing that barrier and that boundary, I don't typically have my computer open when I'm watching a TV show or a movie. I mean, I will if I'm watching a rerun or something I'm not super interested in, or if my wife's watching Desperate Housewives, which I really thought about this, and I want to get the creator on the podcast because I want to find out what it was like coming up with these with these narratives and these storylines. My wife started like a month ago, and she's almost done with season 2. And these are not just like, I think that we kind of got used to recently. HBO, Netflix, you know, Peacock, the streaming services typically don't create 20 episode seasons that are 45 minutes to an hour. Typically, they're 8 to 10, maybe 12 episodes at most. And so when someone's halfway through season 2, it's like the equivalent of 4 or 5 seasons um, on on any other streaming platform. Not to give my wife a hard time, but just to say that I want to know what this guy was thinking. I want to know who created Desperate Housewives. I want to know who came up with these plot lines, who did the writing, why, and what about it works. Like, I'm so curious because I can't watch it, and it's not that I can't. I just I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And so one of the things that I was actually talking to a friend. I went on. We don't do this nearly often enough, I think, as a world, and we're actually going to get to this, I believe. And one of the problems I think that people experience now is that, I mean, I know that people experience, and there's a bunch of really, really great professionals that champion this idea, especially as of March or April, I guess April 2025, is that I texted, Saturday night, I got home from a friend's birthday party, and I took a 2 hour nap on Saturday. So I knew I'd be up late Saturday night, and it was like 12:30, and I just smoked a cigar, and I kind of smelled like cigar. My wife, who's, even when she's not expecting, does not particularly like that smell. So I decided to go for a walk to kind of get it out. And I texted a friend of mine at like 12:30 who lives maybe, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 blocks away. Hey, dude, you want to go for a walk? I said, sure. And he and I went for a 30, 40 minute walk, just talking, just around the neighborhood. And it's such a, it's such a freaking incredible way to spend your time, because I think that there's absolutely something to be said for what's called embodied experiences, which is interpersonal, in person, where we are reading one another's bodies, one another's brains, one another's eyes, one another's faces, and communicating, and really just kind of playing, just kind of testing the waters conversationally and with our thoughts, and just seeing, okay, where's this going to head? I mean, it's part of the thing that I love about podcasts too, is kind of that meandering nature of not having an agenda. Or at least my podcast, I've gotten some feedback, or dare I say criticism, but it's not really critical criticism, it's just criticism about my ability, about the fact that I don't really have so much of a particular direction in my conversations. Yeah, it'll loosely be based on a topic that someone is proficient in or knows more than I know about, but it is, but I purposely keep it meandering. But people need more of these embodied experiences. And so he said, sure, I'm up for it, let's do it. And he thought it was weird. I mean, and Shua, I know you're listening. If you are listening, um, people think, I'm sure he thought it was a little weird. Like, you want to go for a walk? Like, are you breaking up with me? Is there a reason why we're doing this? Um, and one of the things that we were talking about, which has really been resonating on my mind for a couple of months, even though I didn't really think about how to put this into words so well, is, we're talking about, I got a couple of my friends. It's funny. I have a friend that that accuses me of being a cult leader, because he's like, everyone that you hang out with inevitably ends up starts doing this, you start rubbing off on them, right? So, they start listening to similar music to you, or they start listening to podcasts, or, they get more, they know that jogging and exercise is part of your routine, or some kind of creative outlet, or smoking, or, whatever it is, craft beer drinking. I tend to have I guess because I'm so into a lot of these things and I really love them so much, that I think that when people are exposed to something new and relatively niche, and when it's presented to them with a lot of enthusiasm, it becomes contagious. So one of the things that I have been telling my friends about, especially when we just hang out, is talking about I think, really excellent TV that we've been exposed to. And I have to say, again, I've talked about it before, but Severance has been such an amazing show. And one of the things that I was talking to Shua about while we're going on our walk at 1 o'clock in the morning on Saturday night, was not just the notion of severance, because the notion of the show, which again, loosely stated, if you haven't heard it, or if you haven't watched it yet, is essentially the idea that when people go to work, or for this particular company, when they go to work for them, they do a procedure before you start working for the company, where you do not remember what your life outside of work is like. And then when you are in the company, you don't remember what your life outside the company is like. And, you know, when I heard that concept, and the concept was introduced to me from the show, I was like, cool. Sounds pretty cool. It sounds pretty interesting. It sounds pretty relevant and topical, right? Because we're living in a world where, we're living in a world that there is no severance. Literally everything based on what we are just talking about for the last 22 and a half minutes. There is no severance from work-life balance. So, what if this was the most opposite extreme of that? But where my real admiration for the show and the creators, and I know that Ben Stiller was the director and the producer. I don't know that he was the creator. I want to give him the credit because he really, really, I think, blew everyone out of the water and exceeded everyone's expectations by creating really this incredibly tense, cinematic, beautiful, slow burn, emotional, and really, really just a magnificent piece of art. That's what really I think that you can call it. And I mean, if you don't like the style or the pace or the tone, I totally understand. But it really is a piece of art. And one of the things that I was telling Shua that I truly, truly appreciated about the show was how thought out they were with the concept. So, for example, the way that a lot of shows work, and I don't know about Severance, I don't know about Apple TV in particular, although I know this was a conversation that happened in the writer's strike, or one of the points that writers wanted during the writer's strike a couple of years ago. I think it was 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago, was the idea of having a writer's room rather. And what the writer's room is, there's a couple of different aspects to it, but from my understanding, um, you know, there's basically a bunch of writers that are in-house, that work for the studio. And when a creator of a show, or when a studio greenlights a show, then they collaborate with the creator to kind of come up with different potential directions for the show to go, and for characters to develop, and different plot lines that could really manifest and pop up. And part of what their job is to be very thoughtful and take a concept and then try to see what direction the concept could go. And typically what makes great shows great is when you really apply it all the way through and you really think through not just what would happen in this little imaginary world that we're creating right now, but what would be the real life implications if this happened today in today's world. What would the people like? What would the culture like? How would a company keep a scandal quiet? How would a company maintain positive publicity? How would a person behave under X, Y, and Z circumstance in today's world? And not just within this little imaginary world of the TV show that you're creating, but to try to make it kind of realistic and to kind of make it really true and honest. So, for example, and if you haven't watched it by now, spoiler alert, go ahead like a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds. But in White Lotus, for example, one of the things I loved about the end of about the show, because even though it was outrageous and it was a little obviously much, a lot of the conversations and the dynamics and the relationships between people and between families and between the guests and the hotel staff, a lot of those relationships were really, really based and grounded in what the world today is like. And and I think it says really a lot about our society, when the whole first season ends, and this, I guess, where you can kind of start skipping, but if you haven't watched it yet, but when the first season ends and a bunch of people had these, kind of life-changing revelations over the week on their vacation in the White Lotus, and, for example, one girl was on a honeymoon with her douchebag husband that she wasn't sure that she really wanted to marry, and she wanted to leave him based on the honeymoon, and it's only in Hollywood that someone actually gets up after practically going through all the steps of dating someone and getting engaged and planning a wedding and dealing with the other side's family and dealing with your family and trying to understand what your new identity is as not just an individual but as a unit and not being sure what to do with it, right? And then if you're not happy, you could go and you could leave, but most people don't, and it's kind of like, okay, when it's time to talk the talk, sorry, it's easy to talk the talk. When it's time to walk the walk, it's a lot more uncomfortable. It's a lot more challenging. It's a lot more difficult to do. And that to me was perfect because I was rooting for her to leave. I was rooting for her to leave the dude and to say, screw this obnoxious douche. I'm not dealing with him. I'm not dealing with his mom. I'm not dealing with this feeling of having to owe them all the money, that I'll ever have or make the rest of my life. Screw them. I'm going to restart. And this was a mistake. I'm pulling out, and we're gonna start from scratch again. People don't. People very, very, very rarely do people actually do that. And um, it was such a wonderful and honest portrayal. The same thing happened with the son. There was a son who had obviously a very unhealthy relationship with his family and his older sister, and he seemed to find his place in Hawaii, and he found his place in nature, and he loved it. And things were real and things were honest, and he had friends that were nice, and they included him, and he was one with the water, and he was kayaking or canoeing or whatever, rowing or whatever it was. And he's like, I want to stay. I'm running away. I'm never going back home. I'm staying in Hawaii. And of course he doesn't, because you're not supposed to, because that's what real life is like. And someone had to write that. Someone had to decide at HBO or at Max or at whoever produced or whoever came up with the White Lotus. Someone had to think, we're going to give the audience. Everyone has his experience. What's the experience? Like, you're on vacation, you're in a different environment, you're in a different world, you're in a different place. You feel like you want to change everything. You feel like you're a whole new human being. But at the end of the day, you get back into the airport, you get on the plane, you get into the Uber to get home, and you go back to school, and you go back to work, and you continue your life like everyone else. And even though I'm sure people were tempted, I'm sure HBO or the creators were tempted to, kind of let these characters kind of find their way. I think that it was really, really thoughtful and really, really great the way that they said, well, that's not the way that things would play out. And this is supposed to be a comedy, but it's also supposed to be a satire based on real life. And part of the satire and part of the sad comedy, the sad truth, is these moments of inspiration are exactly just that. They're just inspiration. Like someone just lit a match for a couple of seconds, and then the match flickered, died out, and you just went home and you just went inside. The same thing, I think, um, applies to Severance, which is what I really loved, which is what would the show deviates so far from the premise so quickly because the implications of what the premise would be are so massive that you had to really, really, really be thoughtful about what that would mean and what what would happen in real life if this was the case, and what would happen if you don't remember life outside of work. Are you still you? Are you still yourself? What kind of memories do you have? Do you have, if you seem to know how to talk, you seem to know how to have motor functions. Do you know what vacation is? Do you know what skies look like? What's being severed? What's not? How do you feel outside? And when they explore relationships and they explore the difference between the way that people behave on the inside and the outside, it's really, really, really thoughtful. And that's actually, and it's actually something that I am terrible at. It's something that I think is a really, really incredible skill. And one of the reasons why I was thinking about this was in reading, actually, before I even read or started reading Josh Weiskin's book that I mentioned, I think, in my last podcast, The Art of Learning. I heard him on Huberman's podcast. I heard him on Huberman Lab, and one of the things that they were talking about, which I was really, really struck by, was the notion that when Josh was playing chess, that it wasn't just that he was playing chess. He wasn't just thinking of what are the best moves that I can do. He was thinking, what are the best moves that my opponent can do? And what would they do if they saw me do that? And you don't just think like yourself, you think like yourself, and then you think like the other person, and then you think like yourself again. I find that, quite frankly, to be absolutely exhausting. I find that to be an exhausting concept. I find it to be really, really hard to do. Obviously, I'm sure it's easier when you start training yourself at a younger age, but to learn how to think in more than one direction, in more than one place at one time, is an enormous skill. And when that skill is applied properly, it gives you great content, like a great chess player or a great TV show or a great movie. When you're able to put yourself, and I guess, and brilliant actors kind of do this too, or writers, I guess. But let's just say hypothetically for actors on screen, right? A lot of times when actors, like, what do actors do? They have to create a back. Sometimes, a lot of times, they'll talk about how they have to create a backstory for their character. So, for example, when you're starting with The Godfather, hypothetically, and even though I'm saying that movie because it's such a famous movie, I'm realizing as I'm speaking that less and less people in 2025 have probably seen it than people that saw it in 2015. But whatever. So The Godfather, one of the main characters, Michael Corleone, Al Pacino, comes back from World War II. And he has this whole separate relationship and identity with his family relative to the rest of his siblings and the rest of the mafia. And he has a whole different relationship. And one of the things that I'm sure that Al Pacino did or does to enhance his performance and to really create a more believable little world and a more believable role for this character is to imagine, what would I feel like if my family was in the mafia, and which is organized crime, which is essentially rejecting the societal rules and laws and organizations and saying, we don't trust the way that you guys run things around me, so we're going to run things ourselves our own way. That's essentially what a mafia is. And and if you actually look, it's so interesting at where the people that I guess have different variations of mobs or mafias come from. And they're almost all these decrepit, broken down places where the government had essentially failed the people, or the government was constantly being under attack and taken over. Like the particular part of, I think, southern Italy. Oh God, I don't even want to talk. I didn't want to talk about this because I don't even know what I'm talking about enough. But the particular part of Italy where the mafia world got started was constantly under attack and change of rulership, and the people that were constantly getting told the way that life was going to work now, they're getting contradictory orders and contradictory messages every couple of years, maybe even a couple of times within a year. And so what they said was, screw this, we're not going to play by anyone's rules. We're going to create our own values in our own society, in our own system, and have that work. And now imagine the opposite end of that spectrum is someone that is all in on their family values and sorry, on the societal values, and is all in and going to war, enlisting for an army, for your government, and deploying overseas has to be pretty much as far as you can get from a mafia kind of mentality. You're all in on a society. You're buying in. And now Al Pacino as Michael Corleone, in order to really kind of be able to play this role as well as convincingly as possible and as well as he could, he probably would have to, and a lot of actors do this, create this whole history and spend a lot of time. Actors spend months, researching, or even years, researching, studying characters and timelines and context, and then coming up with a whole understanding. You're not just reading words, you're not just reading a script, you're breathing another human being's life and story. You become that other person's character and perspective, and the nuance, and the more that you kind of get into it, the more detailed and nuanced you can get, right? So how do you feel about the fact that your brother's making fun of the fact that you enlisted in the army? Well, you might feel a little bit of resentment because you're kind of breaking, you either, maybe it's a resentment because you know that you're the odd one out in the family and they're picking on you. It could be pride that you're the one that kind of escaped the family story and you're doing what you feel is right and being independent your own way. And all of a sudden, just between those two characters, which I'm sure Al Pacino had the creative space and permission to kind of, be, and and kind of have his body language and his emotional, what's the word for it? I guess the way that he depicts his emotional state with his family and his relationship to his family, that's going to vary based on this backstory that Al Pacino created for himself. So the ability to really be able to kind of think ahead as someone else is so important. If you think about it, even in a more, I guess, down to earth or relatively normal setting, it's the same thing as being a salesman, right? It's the same when you're a salesman or you're doing sales with someone, and really most of life is sales, because even if your job isn't exactly being a salesman, you're going to have to sell yourself or your abilities or your reputation or your company to someone at some point, probably pretty often, and when you're doing those sales, you think to yourself, what's my message I'm getting across? How does that person perceive the message that I'm getting across? Am I doing a good enough job? Do they understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? And are the words that are coming out of my mouth being processed and understood the way that I mean for them to be? And all that has to happen at the same time, at the same moment. I guess the only time that I really feel comfortable doing something like that, I feel pretty comfortable with sales. I also feel very comfortable, actually. It's one of the only things that I hope to get to this point with jujitsu. I'm only 5 or 6 classes in, but one of the things that I feel comfortable like that in is basketball, right? Where there will be certain tells with when I'm playing against someone, even if it's just a one-on-one for 2 or 3 minutes. How are they dribbling with both hands? If they're comfortable with both hands, does that how that means that when I take defense, I have to be prepared for the person to go to the hoop from the left side or the right side. If they're only comfortable with one hand, I know that I could be pretty lenient with letting them start dribbling the other way and keep the comfortable side that they prefer to use in mind. You can also notice things like, are they shooters? Do they prefer one dribble and a shot? Do they have a flow? What do you do and the huge part of basketball and the huge part of any sport is kind of getting in the other person's head and understanding where they're coming from, and then showing them that you're capable of dismantling what they're good at. I think that same thing applies to really everything. Um, It really does. It really applies to everything. So that was just my thoughts on Severance, and just, I guess, the art today that I've been seeing really a lot of, which I'm really happy about, the art of being able to tell a very well thought out story. What would you do if you were in this situation? Another example, really, and you can kind of see where people are naturally good or not at this, would be those game shows like Beast Games, or there's a new Netflix show, Million Dollar something. I forgot what it's called. $1 million something. It's on the Netflix top 10 list at the moment. And it's a game show where basically there's 10 contestants. Each one of them have a hotel room. One person walks into the hotel room and they have $1 million in their box. And they have to go the whole show without anyone knowing that they have the $1 million. So you have to kind of bluff, and you have to juggle. If you're going to lie, you have to keep up who you lied to, what you said, why you said what you said, what caused you to say it, and what would someone else be saying to you? Can you believe what they're going to say? Now, I have a very hard time with this, and I think part of the reason why I have a hard time thinking like this is because I grew up in a very, very safe, wonderful, and comfortable environment where I never really felt the need to kind of question so many narratives. And the idea of questioning narratives only came to me when I was probably, I know, actually, not probably, I was definitely when I was 18. 18 was the first time in my life where I really questioned almost anything that I did. I would question things like, oh, how worthwhile is college? How worthwhile is studying abroad? Those are things that, but like, those are just questions that are kind of everyday. You don't really have to think too much about. And is it for me? Is it not for me? Okay, I'll probably end up doing it anyway, because everyone does it. So, it's not really too thoughtful. But, when the first time that my friend came up to me, Devere, who maybe I texted him. I'll see if I can get him on the podcast, because he has a lot of really wonderful and intelligent things to say as well. When Devere came up to me one time in our gap year, and he was like, "Well, why are you observant?" And I was like, "I don't know, because it's the right thing to do." And he's like, "Why do you say that?" And I said, "I don't know, because my parents do it, I guess." And he's like, "Well, it happens to be that that's not a bad answer. Right? Tradition is good. Family values are good." But he's like, you should, we should think about it. Why do what is truth? Why do when you do something and someone else doesn't do it? Why is what you're doing true as opposed to the other person? And that really, really shattered me. I'm not going to say I was like crying and broken, but it really opened my eyes. I had a lot of confidence that I guess was not well founded. I had a lot of faith I never really thought through. And, there's a kind of, I think that there should be, as you get more mature and as you develop and as you get older, you shouldn't just necessarily take faith for granted, but you should seek to understand it, seek to feed it and nurture it with a combination of emotional and intellectual resources and backing. Um, and it was the first, but that because it was the first time in my life I ever really had to think, what would someone else say about what I think? And, you know, maybe someone telling me something was actually not necessarily telling me what the best thing I wanted to hear was. And I don't think that anyone was really very malicious in my life at that point. But I found myself to be very gullible, actually. There was one time where I became friends. I think I was in ninth grade, and a new guy just moved into the community. New family moved in, and I was I was friendly with the brother, and he was the oldest. I think he had 5 or 6 siblings that were younger than him, which is what the oldest means. And he was the oldest, and at the time he had a 12 or 13 year old sister, and so first time I was at the house, and the 12-year-old sister comes out, and hi, Abigail, nice to meet you. I'm like, hi, nice to meet you. She leaves, goes back to her room, hangs out with her friends, whatever. And about 20, 30, 40 minutes later, comes back down again in a totally different outfit. And I said, huh. I was like, weren't you just wearing something else? And she's like, no, that was my twin sister, Melanie. And I know I'm her twin sister. That was Abigail. I'm Melanie. I'm like, okay. And I mean, I had literally no reason to doubt why she would be lying or making that up, and she did. And actually went on. I could be wrong because obviously my memory is spotty from high school, but I think it went on for several months, if not over a year, or just over a year. And every single time that I would go to their house, she would take the time and effort to kind of change back and forth into different outfits. And obviously, this sounds psychotic. I guess it was more entertaining for a kid, a young girl. Um, but I never stopped to think like, how come I never saw her in family pictures? How come they're not in the same room together at the same time ever? How come whenever I go for family meals, one of them is always away? I never thought about it. I just always thought like, there's no reason for for this whole family to be in on a lie and keep me and keep me from knowing the truth. And man, I think that a lot of people had that experience, and nowadays in particular, I think this also, I guess this will wrap up the episode and kind of fully circle back to the beginning. That's, I think, what was so addicting to me on Twitter or on X, is that X was the place where narratives were shattered and breaking and put back together and reformed again. And everything that we thought, and it was the place that people start posting, and especially in the last couple of years, where a lot of things that were labeled as conspiracy theories turned out to be more true than not. Um, the problem with that is that the door is bust open for everyone to doubt everything, right? How do I even know that this girl, now that I found out that she's not a twin, how do I know that she's even part of the family? How do I even know that this family, like, I don't know, that my friend even wants me over? How do I know? Like, he told me, like, oh yeah, you can come over today, but does that mean that he really doesn't want me there? Like, and when a lot of narratives and premises that we take for granted are shattered, on one hand, it's really, really wonderful because now you feel like you've stepped into the light, and now you feel like you were kind of the darkness. Something didn't make sense, even though you didn't realize it at the time. And oh, now it all fits together. Most of the puzzle pieces work together. Most of them fit, pretty well, but they didn't fit perfectly, and there was missing a piece or two. And now we have more pieces. And the problem is that it's really hard to tell what is true or not, or shattering or not anymore. And so my Twitter feed, or my X feed, was, especially on my phone, and especially being available to me at all times every day, all day, every day, was just a string and a series of posts that I would hope to find some kind of great next debunking, or the next great, alternative perspective, or find another reason why the authoritative system, the authorities, were wrong or lied to us. And I tend to have skepticism and disdain for authoritative figures and institutions, probably because I've been rejected from them my whole life. But it's really, really interesting to think about that. That could be one of the reasons, why it's so addicting, but one of the really, really dangerous components that I'm really happy that I've been, and that's part of the emotional relief that I've been feeling. I've been feeling so tense that everything is anti-Semitism, and everything is racism, and everything is, this is wrong and this is right, and we hate Jews and we love Jews, and Trump is amazing and Trump is terrible, and and oh, you really thought this, but this happened, and they were lying about this, and this was really telling the truth the whole time, and this was not proven, but now it is. And the whole thing, and there's no way of really knowing whether anything is right or wrong, and it just leads to some kind of addictive chaos that I think would be healthier for all of us to kind of choose to avoid, or kind of limit our consumption of, rather, because at the end of the day, even though it feels good, really, really can fuck you up. So those are just some thoughts for today. More episodes coming this week, and have a great rest of the week. I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye now.